The attic smelled of dust and time. I'd come up here to sort through Mom's things before her move to Sunset Gardens, the polite name for the retirement home where she'd now have a little apartment with a view of a manicured lawn and a bird feeder. If not for the move, I'd never have rummaged through these boxes. Why would I? My life had long been neatly shelved. Grown kids, stable job, and enough years since the divorce from Michael that I no longer muttered his name with a bitter twist of my lips. But then, beneath a layer of old shawls and faded magazines, my fingers brushed against it. A small wooden chest with a tarnished brass latch. It opened easily, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Inside were letters, not emails, not texts, real letters, paper thin with age, some with creases from being folded and refolded, others with stains that might have been tears, mine, his. The first envelope slipped from my hands, on the back in faded ink. Jenny, only your hands. Oliver. No, Oliver. That's what they called him in America, where he'd gone after graduation. I'd stayed behind, married someone else, called myself happy. I unfolded the letter. My cheeks burned reading those words, so fervent, so naive. When I come back, we'll go to the ocean. I know you're afraid of it, but with me, you won't be. There had been no ocean. Instead, suburbia, kids, a dog park in the backyard, and Michael, who after 20 years said, "You're not the same as you were." The chest seemed to whisper, "Then who are you?" I pulled out my phone. Social media, a strange thing. It lets you find people you've lost, or maybe chose to lose. Oliver Carter lives in Heartfelt, 200 miles from you. His profile photo, a streak of gray and dark hair, laugh lines around his eyes, but the same smile, a little cynical, a little tender. I closed the chest, then unlocked my phone. "Hi, it's Jenny. Do you still remember promising to show me the ocean?" My finger hovered over send. Then, click. The message was read almost instantly. 3 dots hovered for seconds, like he'd caught his breath at the surprise. Then, Jenny. Jesus. I was just looking at our photos yesterday. My ribs tightened. What photos? Had anything survived besides those letters in the chest? The screen pulsed again. "Can we talk? I'm driving but need to hear your voice." Before I could reply, my phone rang. His voice, deeper than I remembered, with new textures now, a faint accent that hadn't been there before. "You know I Googled you 5 years ago?" he laughed. I pressed the phone closer, afraid words might escape. "Find anyone better?" "Found your antique restoration article. Read it with my wife." Wife. So he hadn't been alone either, but the past tense hung between us. She's gone. 2 years. Simple words, but something fractured under them. A shadow I'd recognize even after 30 years. We talked for an hour, about kids. His son, a surgeon, my daughter, a teacher. How our old college town had changed. The back pain we never had racing for the last bus in the rain. "Know what I'm doing right now?" he asked suddenly. "Preparing to say something stupid?" "Looking at train tickets. To you. Well, to that cafe with the green stools. Still there? The cafe. Where he'd first kissed me. Clumsy, hurried. Like he feared I'd stop him. "It's a Starbucks now," I said. "Christ, I hate this timeline." He groaned, but I heard the smile. "Meet me there, tonight." "You're insane. It's 200 miles. "Yeah. If I leave now, I'm there by 7. Silence. Through the open window came the smell of a neighbor's barbecue, just like that summer in '93. "Jenny." "Come," I whispered. After hanging up, I stared at the chest. On its lid, a tiny carved flower. He'd once called it forget-me-not. A memory symbol, he'd explained. I shut the chest, opened my laptop. Urgent. Same-day salon appointment. Cut and color. 200 miles. 6 hours. And a lifetime of second thoughts. The Starbucks was too bright, too loud. I chose a table by the window anyway. the same spot where we'd sat decades ago, though the green vinyl stools had been replaced by sleek metal chairs. My wine glass left damp rings on the polished surface as I twisted it nervously. What the hell am I doing here? I'd changed 3 times before leaving, put on makeup, then wiped half of it off. My daughter would have laughed if she'd seen me. A 54-year-old woman acting like a teenager before prom. The door chimed, and there he was, Oliver Carter, in worn leather shoes and a gray jacket that hugged shoulders still broad, but slightly stooped now. His hair, still thick, though silver streaked the dark waves, was longer than in his profile picture. When he spotted me, his whole face changed. That smile. God, that smile. Jenny. My name in his mouth sounded like a secret. He smelled like cedar and cold air when he sat down. We both reached for our drinks at the same time, fingers brushing. A spark jumped between us. 30 years dissolved in a touch. You still take red wine at room temperature, he noted. You still remember useless details. The first awkward minutes melted as the wine did. He told me about California, about teaching himself guitar after his wife passed. I talked about restoring broken furniture, giving shattered things new life. When the conversation lulled, he traced the edge of my hand with one finger. You've got sawdust under your nails. I was working before. Still impatient. Still dive into things without preparing. His thumb found the scar on my wrist, the one from the bicycle accident sophomore year. Still you. Night fell outside the windows. The baristas started wiping counters, giving us pointed looks. Oliver leaned close. His breath warmed my ear as he whispered, "They're playing our song. I hadn't even noticed the music, some acoustic cover of Every Breath You Take. We danced to the original at that dive bar near campus." "Liar," I laughed. "This isn't even Come See My Hotel." His hand squeezed mine. "They've got a rooftop bar with worse music but better view." I should have said no. Should have remembered my early meeting, my daughter coming for brunch tomorrow, the careful life I'd built. Instead, I left cash on the table. "Just one drink," I said as we stepped into the crisp night. Oliver's laugh curled around me like smoke as he hailed a cab. We both know that's a lie. The city lights blurred past the taxi window. His knee pressed against mine, warm and solid. I'd forgotten this, the electric anticipation, the delicious terror of jumping before looking. 30 years later, and we were still terrible at goodbyes. The elevator ascended painfully slow, and suddenly it hit me how insane this was. Me, a grown woman with 2 degrees, a mortgage, and arthritis in her left knee, standing in a cramped cabin with a man I hadn't seen in 30 years. His hand burned through the thin fabric of my blouse, where it rested on my waist. The room was modest but had a decent city view. He turned on dim lighting, just enough to see faces, not enough for harsh details. A smart choice. "Sorry, it's stuffy in here," he said, opening the window to let in the night breeze. I stood by the bed, suddenly self-conscious. This body I knew every wrinkle of in the mirror now felt foreign. What if he saw the stretch marks from pregnancies? The appendectomy scar? "Jenny," he stepped closer. "We could just talk." I laughed, too loud, too nervous. "What, no one's undressing first?" His lips brushed my temple. "Let's take it slow." His kiss started at the corner of my mouth, like he was tasting me. Then my neck, which I hadn't let anyone touch in years. His fingers unbuttoned my blouse with the patience of someone in no hurry. "Christ, you're so—" His voice trailed off as his palm traced the curve of my waist. I closed my eyes. His touch was a language I'd forgotten, but my body remembered. Every nerve ending sparked awake like ice meeting fire. I'm a little... I didn't know how to say it. "I know." He pulled me closer. "We're not 20, but that doesn't mean it's worse." His hands were sure. They knew where to pause, where to press harder. When I moaned, he whispered, "Yeah, I remember that too." There were awkward moments. His knee cracked when we shifted positions, my leg cramped. We laughed about it. Then suddenly, we weren't laughing at all. This body I'd considered finished suddenly came alive. Every touch, every breath carried weight. I stopped thinking about how I looked. I just felt. Afterward, we lay tangled like teenagers. His fingers drew circles on my shoulder. "We wasted 30 years," he murmured. I turned to face him, but we found each other again. City lights played across the ceiling. I listened to his heartbeat, the same rhythm as decades ago, just slower, wiser. I closed my eyes, for the first time in years, without dreading tomorrow. His lips traced my neck with slow deliberation, like he was reading an old map where every curve, every scar was familiar territory. "You still tilt your head left when you want me to continue," he murmured, his breath scorching my skin. I didn't answer. Words took up too much space. Instead, there were only sounds. His ragged breathing, the rustle of sheets beneath us, a distant car horn through the window. His palms were calloused yet gentle. A working man's hands that remembered. Even after 30 years, they knew exactly where to touch my hip to make me gasp. "Here." His finger traced my ribcage. I nodded without opening my eyes. "And here." Lips lower now, nearer my thigh. My body arched of its own accord. He chuckled, low and slightly rough. "You always did that." We took our time. No fear of parents walking in, no last bus to catch. Just this dim hotel room, these exploring hands, this new old discovery. Then his teeth grazed that soft spot between shoulder and neck, and my body ignited like dry timber. "Oh God, that's new," he narrowed his eyes. "Didn't have this at 20. I didn't know whether to laugh or sob. This body I'd considered spent had suddenly revealed entire vaults of sensitivity. When we finally joined, it was neither clumsy nor hurried. It was practiced. Like a dance we'd forgotten, but our bodies remembered every step. "Jenny," he breathed my name as we moved. Slow, then fast, then slow again. I caught his gaze, gray, transparent, the same, and suddenly understood. We weren't trying to reclaim the past. We were uncovering something entirely new. Afterward, we lay damp and breathless. His hand rested on my abdomen, over the silver streaks from childbirth. "Know the best part?" I turned toward him. "We don't have to pretend to fall asleep so the other can sneak home." He laughed and pulled me closer. Dawn brightened the window. For the first time in years, I wasn't in a hurry to meet it. A sliver of sunlight cut through the drapes, painting a golden stripe across the tangled sheets. I woke to the rich, bitter aroma of coffee, nothing like the weak brew I hastily pour into my travel mug on weekday mornings. Oliver stood by the window in nothing but his jeans, hunched over his phone. His salt and pepper hair was sleep mussed, shoulders slightly rounded, flesh and blood. Not a curated social media post, not some faded memory. "Already calling someone?" My voice came out hoarse from last night. He turned. A shadow of concern flickered in his eyes. "My son. Thinks I'm at that cardiology conference in Chicago." I nodded, pulling the sheet up. This was always the most vulnerable moment, when daylight dissolved the night's magic, leaving two middle-aged adults with their responsibilities, their schedules, their separate lives. He placed a steaming mug beside me. "No sugar, dash of cinnamon, just how you—" "And you used to hate coffee," I interrupted, taking a careful sip. "Drank that awful vending machine swill in college." "People change. Not where it counts." Silence settled between us. Outside, the metro rail rumbled, a sound that hadn't existed in our college town. "Jenny." He sat on the edge of the bed, his palm warm against my bare shoulder. "I want this to continue." I looked away. His fingers smelled of almond shave cream and something faintly musky. Us. "We're not kids anymore, Oliver. There's your furniture restoration business, my medical practice, grown children who'd be mortified." His thumb traced my collarbone. "And 3 decades we can't reclaim." Wrapping the sheet around myself, I stood. The fabric carried his scent. That expensive sandalwood cologne undercut with something uniquely him. No promises, I said. No 5-year plans. Did we ever keep them anyway? The memory surfaced unbidden, that yellowed letter in the wooden box. We'll be together forever. 22-year-old Oliver had penned those words, not knowing forever would last exactly 11 weeks. I could come to Boston weekends, he offered. Or you could, that sounds unromantic, practical. His smile deepened the crinkles around his eyes, lines that hadn't existed when we'd first loved each other. I studied his hands, those surgeon's fingers that had rediscovered my body with a patience our younger selves never possessed. Hands that understood waiting. Okay, I extended my palm. But no empty vows. He pressed his lips to my knuckles. Scout's honor. Beyond these walls, our real lives waited. My workshop filled with half-restored antiques, his downtown clinic, oblivious adult children who'd never imagined their parents capable of such reckless passion. But for now, there was just this sunlit room, and 2 hearts that had finally stopped being afraid.